Outside a district headquarters, the day has already begun. People are waiting, files are stacked, phones are ringing. Somewhere, a crisis is brewing. An administrative decision has to be made. In this atmosphere of tension and expectation, an officer walks in. He does not rush, he does not speak, he watches. And today, the officer who has reported for duty is Aristotle, IAS. Imagine if Aristotle joined the civil services today. He would not begin with rules, he would not begin with procedures, he would begin with character. Because for Aristotle, governance is a moral craft. Every decision an officer makes, whom to listen to, when to act, how firmly to stand, how compassionately to respond, shapes not just outcomes but human lives. In this episode, we ask a simple thought experiment. What would Aristotle actually do as an IAS officer? How would he handle pressure, crises, and everyday dilemmas? And what does this idea of virtue teach us about public service today? Let's step into the IAS through Aristotle's eyes. Aristotle does not rush to his chamber, he watches. For him, governance begins not with files but with people. Long before constitutions and rule books, Aristotle asked a deeper question. What's the purpose of political power? His answer was clear. The aim of governance is eudaimonia, not happiness as pleasure, but human flourishing. For Aristotle, flourishing does not mean comfort or luxury. It means being able to live a fully human life. In a district, this might mean a farmer who is not crushed by uncertainty, a child who can learn without fear, a family that can access healthcare without humiliation, a citizen who's heard, not dismissed. It means people having the stability to plan their lives, the security to take responsibility, and the dignity to participate in society. This is how Aristotle would read governance, not as delivery of schemes alone, but as a creation of conditions in which people can stand on their own feet. Flourishing, Aristotle believed, is not something that state gives. It's something good governance makes possible. That is why, if Aristotle were an IAS officer, he would judge every policy by a simple test. Does this help people live well? Not just is it legal, is it efficient, is it procedure, but is it good for human flourishing? For Aristotle, the purpose of governance is human flourishing. But governance is not a vision statement, it's a series of decisions taken under pressure with incomplete information and real consequences. Which brings us to the harder question. How does one decide well? How would Aristotle get his decisions right in real, imperfect world of administration? In public service, deciding well rarely means choosing between right and wrong. More often, it means choosing between two imperfect options. By nightfall, a real test arrives for Aristotle. The river is rising, villages downstream are vulnerable, rescue teams are on standby. Act too quickly and the lives may be lost. Act too slowly and the damage may be irreversible. This is the kind of situation Aristotle had in mind when he asked how a person should decide. Aristotle's answer was not a formula, it was the golden mean. Long ago, Aristotle observed that most ethical failures do not come from bad intentions, they come from extremes. Acting too much or acting too little, acting too fast or not acting at all. Every virtue, Aristotle argued, lies between two vices. Courage lies between rashness and cowardice. Firmness lies between cruelty and weakness. Generosity lies between waste and indifference. In public service, this matters more than it seems. Administrative failure often occurs not because officers are corrupt, but because they choose an extreme. Aristotle would reject both panic and paralysis. He would ask Instead, what is the right response here, now, for these people? Not the boldest action, not the safest action, but the right one. The golden mean is not a compromise, it is proportion. It requires seeing the situation clearly, weighing risk against responsibility, and acting neither too much nor too little. This is why Aristotle's ethics does not offer formulas. The mean is not written in a rule book, it must be judged. And the judgment depends not on rules alone, but on the character of the person who decides. Which brings us to the next step in Aristotle's thinking. Deciding well is not just about judgment, it depends on the moral quality an officer brings to everyday encounters with power, with conflict, and people. In public service, the hardest tests are often not technical, they are human, not floods of files, but people, impatience, anger, expectation. This is where Aristotle believed character matters most. Because power is rarely tested in dramatic moments, it's tested every day in how an officer listens, how firmly they stand, and how fairly they respond when emotions run high. That is why Aristotle focused not on rules, but on moral virtues, stable qualities of character that shape how a person sees, feels, and acts, especially under pressure. Let's take courage. In public service, courage is not aggression, it is the ability to stand by a just decision without becoming reckless and without retreating into fear. Let's come to temperance. It's not self denial, but emotional discipline. The capacity to act without anger, to resist ego, to remain steady when provoked. Let's talk about another virtue, justice. For Aristotle, justice is not about treating everyone identically. It's about giving each person what is due, neither more nor less. Which is why justice collapses when officers are rigid and when they are indulgent. Justice also depends on self control. An officer who cannot govern anger, fear, or favor cannot remain impartial for long. Without temperance, fairness quietly erodes. Add to this truthfulness, honest reasoning, clear communication, decisions that cannot be explained without embarrassment, and generosity, the humane use of public resources without waste and without cruelty. None of these virtues act alone. For Aristotle, character is not a list, it's a pattern, each virtue restraining excess in the others. A person without courage cannot sustain integrity. A person without fairness cannot earn trust. A person without self control cannot uphold justice for long. This is why ethical governance, in Aristotle's eyes, begins with the kind of person officer becomes. But this raises a deeper problem. Even a virtuous person must decide how much firmness is enough when compassion becomes indulgence and when restraint turns into inaction. So, what guides virtue itself when situations are complex and rules fall silent? Aristotle's answer is practical wisdom. Virtue matters, but Aristotle was clear about one thing: virtue by itself does not tell us what to do in every situation. A courageous officer may still act rashly, a compassionate officer can still be indulgent, a fair officer can still be rigid. So, when virtues pull in different directions, something else is required. This is where Aristotle introduces his most demanding idea, practical wisdom. By now, the file is complete, the rules have been consulted, the data supports more than one option, and yet the decision remains unsettled. This is the moment Aristotle cared about most. Because Aristotle understood something uncomfortable. Rules speak in general terms, situations never do. To explain this, Aristotle made a crucial distinction. He spoke about three kinds of knowing: techne, the skill of making and executing, the ability to follow procedures, meet targets, deliver outputs; sophia, understanding principles and causes, knowing why systems work the way they do. And then there is phronesis, not theory, not technique, but the capacity to judge What is appropriate here and now for these people in these circumstances? In the IAS, this distinction is everything. Dashboards measure performance, rules ensure consistency. Policy theory explains systems, but governance lives in particulars, and particulars demand judgment. Practical wisdom is what allows an officer to know when to insist, when to adapt, and when restraint itself is the right action. This is why Aristotle insisted that no virtue can operate well without phronesis. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Compassion without wisdom becomes indulgence. Justice without wisdom becomes rigidity. Practical wisdom does not replace virtue, it guides it. This is also why ethical governance cannot be automated. Algorithms can optimize, rules can constrain, but only a human being with cultivated judgment can decide what ought to be done. In Aristotle's ethics, the highest responsibility of a public office is not mere compliance, it is judgment, which raises the final question: if good judgment matters this much, how is it formed and sustained over a lifetime of power? If good judgment must be sustained over a lifetime, then it cannot depend on rare moments of insight. It must be trained. This is where Aristotle makes one of the most demanding claims. Virtue, he argues, is not a moment of moral clarity, it's a habit. People don't become people of integrity by deciding to act rightly once. They become so by acting rightly again and again. This matters deeply in public service because administration is not just shaped by isolated decisions but by patterns. How an officer listens today becomes how the officer listens tomorrow. How authority is exercised at the top quietly becomes the norm below. Aristotle understood that moral character is formed through practice within a community, not through instructions alone, not through codes pasted on walls, but through example. This is why Aristotle paid such attention to role models and moral training. Virtue, he believed, is often caught before it is consciously taught. Over time, these repeated acts accumulate, decisions become steadier, responses become proportionate, judgment becomes more reliable, not because the rules change, but because the person deciding changed. In this sense, an office develops character just as a person does. A culture forms around what is rewarded, what is tolerated, and what is quietly discouraged. For Aristotle, this is how ethical governance endures, not through perfect individuals, but through habituated judgment sustained across time. Which brings us to the final reflection. If character can shape an office, and officers shape institutions, what kind of state emerges from the habits and judgment of those who govern it? The kind of state that emerges is not built in moments of spectacle, it's built quietly through the accumulated judgment of those who govern. Such a state may not always look impressive. There are not dramatic gestures, no grand announcements, no heroic headlines, yet something important is at work. Decisions are made without excess. People are heard without delay. Power is exercised without fear or favor. This is what Aristotle would recognize as good governance. Not perfect, not flawless, but reliable. In modern discussions, we often speak of state capacity in terms of budgets, institutions, and technology. Aristotle reminds us of something more basic. A state ultimately depends on the judgment of those who govern. Laws can be written, procedures can be designed, systems can be optimized, but no rule can anticipate every situation. At that moment of decision, what matters most is who the officer has become. This is why Aristotle placed such weight on character, because when character fails, even well designed institutions weaken. And when character holds, institutions endure pressure without losing direction. Aristotle does not promise ideal governance. He offers something more demanding, a vision of public service where ethics is not an afterthought, but the foundation. In that sense, Aristotle never really left public life. He is present wherever officers choose judgment over impulse, proportion over extremes, and virtue over convenience. Because laws can guide action, but character guides judgment. So long, happy learning.